Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, I welcome you all to today's session on practical diagnostic hematology. The HAP was born a few years ago with the aim of learning pathology together. HAP successfully organized an annual conference and a CME. Unfortunately, the second annual conference had to be cancelled due to the onset of the pandemic. However, the oration by Professor C. Sundaram was recently organized and was very well received. The sessions today and tomorrow will be on different topics in hematology and will be of use to PG students as well as consulting pathologists. The speakers for today are Dr. Manu Goyal, Dr. Vanajakshi, Senior Consultant Hematopathologist, and myself. Dr. Manu Goyal is Medical Director, HOD Hematopathology, and Consultant Molecular Hematopathology pathologist at AMPATH Hyderabad. Due to time constraints, questions for all the three speakers will be taken at the end of the three talks. You can send the questions in writing during the session. Let's start with Dr. Manu. Dr. Manu, will you share your screen?
Good afternoon. I'll just share. Just give me a second. Good afternoon, teachers, seniors, and my dear colleagues. After a long time, I think we are interacting, as ma'am said, after a long break of COVID. So some blood flow and blood topics, hematology related topics are now on the card. So let's start. What I'm going to talk today is on the workup of acute leukemias beyond immunophenotyping. So my talk would be like talking about the ancillary techniques which are used, their applications, the limitations, followed by those techniques which are used in the diagnosis of ALLs, TALLs, AMLs, and other leukemias. And to start with, I'll just display a case. 5-year-old female presenting with joint pains, fever, lymphadenopathy. On examination, she had pallor, generalized lymphadenopathy, and splenomegaly. Her CBC's complete blood counts showed anemia, mild leukocytosis with presence of blasts and thrombocytopenia. Bone marrow showed sheets of blasts, which you can see, which are the type 1 blasts, and the myeloperoxidase was negative in them. The immunophenotypic profile showed positivity for the B cell markers, that is a 19, CD10, and 22 DIM, and with the presence of DIM, the 34, partial DIM 34, 38, and absence of CD20 B cell, other T cell markers, and myeloid markers. So the diagnosis rendered was a B lymphoblastic leukemia, color positive. Now, we may be thinking, yes, we have done our job, but actually our job is still not finished. Why? Because we have not still applied our classification system into this diagnosis, which from the time since 2001, we have been applying genetics as a part of our diagnostic workup, and the WHO has the classification basis on both the immunophenotypic profile and the genetics. Why this classification is required? One, it helps in risk stratification. The various genetic disorders are associated with various risk stratifications. The therapeutics and also the follow-up. Treatment protocols, especially whether the patient will go for a stem cell transplant or not, is based on the genetic, the leukemias with the associated genetic phenotype. Apart from that, there are some targeted therapies which are used, especially we know that the BCR-ABL positive BALLs, we use the TKI inhibitors, especially the imatinib and the nilotinib and the dasatinib. Atra, well-known therapeutic drug for the APMLs. And if there is some specific abnormalities or molecular abnormality which is picked up at diagnosis, this is used for the follow-up and assessment of the minimal residual disease post-treatment. Now, what are the technologies used? The genetics, if it is studied at the cellular level, is called as a cytogenetics, and the techniques used are the conventional karyotyping and fluorescence in situ hybridization, that is the FISH. At the molecular level, it is the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, microarrays, sequencing, especially the Sanger sequencing. Now with the current trend, is the next generation sequencing or the NGS. A few words on the karyotyping. Once the sample, once the blood is collected or the bone marrow is collected, these are cultured, harvested, stained, and then analyzed. And the karyogram is obtained, as you can see here. And this gives an overview of the number of chromosomes. As we can see here, the 21 chromosome, there are 4 copies of 4 chromosomes. 8 is 3. So it gives a numerical aberrations. It also gives us structural aberrations as transfer of some genetic material from one chromosome to the other. All these are studied in this karyogram. So the karyotyping helps in evaluating the numerical abnormalities, structural, the balanced translocations, inversions, and the unbalanced structural abnormalities like the deletions. Apart from that, the complex, which involve both the numerical and the structural abnormalities. Now, what is the advantage of doing a karyotype? It gives an overview and the analysis of the entire genomes. It identifies the whole chromosomes and obvious chromosomal abnormalities, and it is relatively inexpensive technique. What are the limitations? It is technically challenging, and it takes a long time for the metaphase to grow and be evaluated. Failure rates are high, and abnormalities with small focus, especially less than 3 megabases, may be missed. To supplement it, we use the technique called as a FISH. Here, the principle is that there is a probe which is complementary to the target DNA, which is tagged with a fluorescent or a fluorochrome. And when this fluorochrome fluor is excited, a signal is generated. There are 3 types of FISH probes, which is the chromosomal enumeration probe, the CEP, dual color, dual fusion. There can be dual color, single fusion as well, and the break apart probes. I'll just go a little bit into it. The CEP, which is the simple chromosomal enumeration probe, it gives the number of chromosomes in a particular cell. As you can see, this normal cell has 2 chromosomes, set of chromosomes, which is highlighted by 2 green signals. If there is a monosomy, 1 chromosomal signal is lost, or if there is trisomy, there are 3 signals. Dual color, dual fusion. There are 2. The best example can be illustrated by the PML RARA or the BCR-ABL. Now, the PML gene is located on the 15 chromosome. Let's say this is the green signal represents the PML, which is 2 PML signals and 2 RARA signals, which are the red. Once a translocation occurs, which is reciprocal translocation, that means PML goes to the RARA and the RARA goes to the PML. So the set of normal chromosomes are seen here, 1 red, 1 green. And this is a translocated product. That is the PML RARA and the RARA PML. So there are 2 fusion signals, which is caused by overlapping of red and green signals. Break apart probe is the probe in which you can see that a single locus has a fusion signal. This is used for especially chromosomes which have multiple partner chromosomes and partner is unknown. The best example being the MLL or the KMT2A. This probe has a fusion signal in the normal cells. As we can see, that yellow signal is seen in the normal cells. When a translocation occurs, this normal signal is still retained, but the translocation is represented by 1 green and a 1 red signal. That is the positivity for this translocation. The advantages are it can be performed on the interphase and the metaphase FISH, and it can identify abnormalities which can be missed by the karyotyping. It is accurate and rapid. More number of cells can be evaluated, and it can be performed on different tissue types. And it can be used especially when the karyotyping has failed. Or it gives an answer whether that chromosomal abnormality is there or not. So it's a targeted analysis of the genomes. It's slightly expensive, requires a setup with fluorescence microscope and specific filters. Sometimes it can generate false positive signals, and it is not useful for chromosomal abnormalities less than 10 kilobases. For chain reaction, there are various types of PCRs, the real-time, the reverse transcriptase, the quantitative multiplex PCR. The advantages are that it's a useful technique, especially when karyotyping results are negative. It is rapid and accurate, can detect translocations, mutations, duplications, which can involve the genes, can be used for to monitor disease course after the treatment. The limitations are it requires trained personnel, infrastructure, and detects only known abnormalities. All said and done, FISH and PCR can complement karyotyping and cannot replace it. This one has to remember. Other molecular techniques which are used in practice are the Sanger sequencing, which evaluates a particular gene for the point mutations, insertions, and deletions. Best examples being the SEPA and the NPM1. Fragment length analysis. Here, the changes in length due to insertions or deletions in the genes, or when there is a difference in the lengths of the fragments as seen in the restricted fragment length polymorphism is evaluated. The best example being the FLT3 ITD and NPM1. Microarrays is studying multiple targeted genetic abnormalities evaluated at one go. And now with the next gen sequencing coming up, or the NGS, you can study multiple gene sequences at one go, and it identifies both the known or the hotspots and the unknown mutations. The limitations of these technologies are they are technically definitely challenging, are expensive. For the Sanger sequencing, a minimum of 15% allele burden should be there for it to be qualified as positive. NGS overcomes many of these aspects, but it requires setup of bioinformatics and stringent quality control and requires definitely an expertise. So let us look how we are going to use these technologies in the diagnostic workup of acute leukemias. So first, taking the lymphoblastic leukemias, we all know that the lymphoblastic leukemias are the B, T, and the NK type, which is now currently is included as a provisional entity in the WHO classification of 2017. Now, although genetic abnormalities in the NK lymphoblastic leukemias are not very well qualified as it is a rare disease, we will not include in our discussion today. In the B lymphoblastics, we know that there are certain genetic abnormalities which are seen and consistently, and they have a prognostic implication. Hence, they are categorized under the recurrent genetic abnormalities, BALL with recurrent cytogenetic abnormalities. And any of these abnormalities, when not present, are classified under the B-cell ALL as NOS. And provisional entity, which is the early TPALL, we'll be discussing a few words about it in the subsequent slides. So let us see how this genetic abnormalities has an impact on the prognostication. The ETV6, RUNX1, and the hyperdiploidy are seen commonly in the children and have an excellent prognosis, whereas in the KMT2A or the MLL or rearranged abnormalities are seen in the infants and have a very, very poor prognosis and are associated with very high risk group. And the BCR-ABL1, the BCR-ABL1-like, and the hypodiploidy are seen in the adults and are associated with poor prognosis. Now, the standard workup includes the karyotyping, which evaluates the overview of the chromosomal abnormalities, picks the hyper and hypodiploidy, and obvious translocations. FISH is used to supplement for identify the translocation, sometimes which is missed on the karyotyping, especially the ETV6 RUNX1. BCR-ABL, MLL, and E2A PBX. Now, the specialty of ETV6 RUNX1 FISH is it can pick up the cases of hyperdiploidy as well as the IAMP21, which is now a provisional entity. So the FISH is the only mode of diagnosing the IAMP21. Now, if FISH is positive for any of these disorders or translocations, PCR can be performed and can identify the transcript which is there for these respective abnormalities. A few words about a new entity or the provisional entity, which is BCR-ABL1 like BALL. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on this. These are characterized, there are four set of genetic disorders which are associated with the BCR-ABL1 like BALL. That include the CRLF2 expression. This is one category. The second category involves the ABL and JAK pathway activating fusions and the mutations involving the JAK2, JAK1, and NRAS. These are the genes, and IKZF deletions. So these are the four group of categories of genetic disorders which are seen in the BCR-ABL1 like BALL. In the ABL and JAK pathway, There can be fusions, genes involving the ABL1, ABL2, CSF1R, PDGFRB, and the JAK2. Now, these can have various partner chromosomes which can be associated apart from the BCR, and hence break apart probes are used for all these picking up those abnormalities. Regarding the CRLF2, there can be a IGH CRLF2 fusion, or there can be a deletion adjacent to the CRLF2, which can cause the default fusion of P2RY8 CRLF2. And there can be, apart from that, apart from the translocations, there can be a point mutations which can involve the CRLF2. And important thing is that 50% of the cases of those with CRLF2 can have concomitant JAK2 and JAK1 mutations. Now, how to approach these BCR-ABL? There are a couple of algorithms which have been proposed. One involves the microarrays or the low density microarrays. And if the cases are subjected to the microarray and it is found to be negative, then it is not a BCR-ABL like PALL. If it is positive, then depending on the CRLF2 levels, whether it is high or low, if it is high, FISH for CRLF2 is performed. And if it is positive, then it is a Philadelphia-like ALL. If it is a low CRLF2, FISH for the genes which I have said, the ABL and the ABL and the JAK2 pathway are performed, which involve the ABL1, ABL2, PDGFRB, CSF1R, JAK2, and EPOR. And if these are positive, then it is categorized as Philadelphia-like ALL. If these are negative, then targeted mutation analysis, exome gene sequencing, or RNA sequencing is performed. Now, the other approaches, identify the CRLF2 expression by immunophenotyping. If it is high, then perform the FISH for the CRLF2, and if it is positive, then perform the Philadelphia-like ALL mutation. And it is positive for the Philadelphia-like ALL, and then you can do the JAK2 mutation analysis. If it is negative, no further action. And if it is a low CRLF2, then again perform the FISH for the ABL and the JAK2 pathway. And if it is positive, categorized as Philadelphia-like ALL. Otherwise, no further evaluation is done. For the TALLs, although not very popular amongst the leukemias to perform cytogenetic cytogenetic evaluation, but to have an understanding, there are 50 to 70% of the TALLs which have cytogenetic abnormalities. Now, these could be either translocations, deletions, and the mutations. Mutations involve the Notch1, and quite a significant proportion of patients are seen in the adults, which are associated with poor prognosis. Amongst the translocation, they are divided into 4 groups: TAL, TLX1, TLX3, and the HOXA groups. Now, I won't go into the depth of each, but generally these translocations involve the T cell receptor gene, and those which are associated with the TLX1 are associated with good prognosis. Now, another mutation or another gene which is of interest is the LYL1 or the LIL1. This is the gene which is involved with the most of the ETP ALLs and is supposedly associated with poorer prognosis as compared to the rest of the TALLs. Now, the standard workup, although there are no such kind of recommendations, but generally to be considered good basis, the data are karyotyping, FISH or PCR for translocations which involve especially the FISH involving the TAL1, KMT2A, and the MYC, PCR for the TAL1, SIL1, and MLL-T10, Sanger sequencing for the Notch1. Although I might be rattling some of the genes which are not so common, but important, you have to just remember TAL-SIL1 is one of the important translocations which occur in the TALL. Coming to the acute myeloid leukemias, which is the most complex group amongst the leukemias and has the molecular has a lot of role to play in this. The current WHO 2017 has segregated the blastic plasmacytoid dendritic cell neoplasm out of the AML group. As you can see that AML and precursor neoplasms, the blastic plasmacytoid group is segregated out. Now, AML, which were earlier categorized as M0, M1, M2, and so on and so forth, are no more now the classification trends. Now, the genetic abnormalities, if there are some certain genetic abnormalities which which occur consistently are now grouped under the AML with recurrent genetic abnormalities. Now, these can involve translocations of various genes, as you can see, or there can be at the genetic level there can be mutations, which the common ones are the NPM1, SEPA, and the RUNX1. The RUNX1, mutated RUNX1, AML with mutated RUNX1 is just a provisional entity in the current WHO 2017 classification. Now, apart from that, the AMLs which are associated with MDS and the therapy-related AMLs are having some commonalities. They have certain common cytogenetic abnormalities and morphology. So these are separate groups. And there are myeloid sarcomas, which you'll be hearing about in a short while from Roshi ma'am. And then there are myeloid proliferations associated with Down syndrome, the TAM, and the myeloid leukemias. These are separate entities. And once all these entities are excluded, then you can call it as AML, NOS, and then categorize as M0, M1, M2, etc., etc. Apart from that, that's a WHO classification, but parallelly, the molecular biologists are very, very active. They also have a genomic classification. Now, since before 2008, there were only two classes of genetic abnormalities, the class 1 and the class 2. Sorry. The class 1 involved the activated signaling pathways, and class 2 were the transcription and differentiation, that is the translocations. Then moving forward in the next 5 years, the third category of epigenetic modifiers were included basis the next-gen sequencing. Now, these were called as a class 3. Now, since 2013, the Cancer Genome Atlas project has categorized the AMLs into 9 different classes, retaining the activated signaling pathways as one group. Now the transcription factors, now they have categorized into 2 groups, transcription factor fusions and the myeloid transcription factor genes, which now the SEPA and RUNX1 have been categorized in different classes. Apart from that, the NPM1 or the nucleophosphamine is belonging to the class 2, and the tumor suppressor gene, which is the TP53, which is very, very important, has been put in the class 3, and other epigenetic modifiers have been grouped into other various classes. Don't get perturbed by this slide. It shows a lot of data, but what I'm going to focus here is amongst the genetic abnormalities, the NPM1 mutation is the most common abnormality which is seen here, and it is amongst the AMLs. Apart from that, the translocations, the T1517, that is the APML RARA, and the 821 are the common ones. And the third thing is the chromatin, other than these, the chromatin spliceosome abnormalities and the TP53 mutations are seen in the significant proportion of patients of AML. Now, the thing to note here is, apart from the basic or driver mutations, there can be secondary abnormalities which can involve the other genes, and they can influence the prognosis of the AML patients. Like, for example, 821 is associated significantly with the KIT mutation. Likewise, the inversion 16 is associated with the KIT and the FLT3 TKD mutations. And even in the NPM group, if you can see that it is associated with FLT3 ITD mutations and the other, the DNMT3 and TET2, etc. Now, the ELN has come out with a risk stratification by genetic groups, and the favorable ones include the 821 and the inversion 16. Apart from that, the biallelic, you have to see here and note here, it's a biallelic mutated SEPA. It is not just the mutated SEPA, it's a biallelic mutated SEPA. And then mutated NPM, provided there is no FLT3 ITD mutation, or even if it is there, it should be of low allele burden. So all these things are grouped under the favorable. The most adverse ones are the RUNX1 mutated AXL1 TP53 and FLT3 ITD high without an NPM1. Apart from these mutations, complex karyotype and those involving the KMT2A, DEC2, NUC2, and those associated with the MDS-like abnormalities and the BCR-ABL. These are all categorized under the adverse group. In the intermediate group, if there is a mutated NPM with a high FLT3 ITD, or it's a wild type NPM without FLT3 ITD or the low FLT3 ITD, then it is grouped under the intermediate. And only the abnormality of KMT2A, which is associated with 911, the T911, is not in the adverse group and is placed under the intermediate group. So what does the workup include? As usual, the karyotyping, FISH, and the PCR. Karyotyping identifies the recurrent cytogenetic abnormalities as mentioned above. Apart from that, it can identify the complex karyotype. It can identify the MDS or TAML related cytogenetic abnormalities. And in cases of Down syndrome, identify the trisomy 21. FISH can confirm such kind of recurrent cytogenetic abnormalities, especially T1517. It can give a rapid diagnosis and can prevent and save the patient's life. 821, inversion 16, 922, KMT2 break apart, etc. can be used. Inversion 16 is most often missed on the karyotyping and can be picked up by the FISH. That is one important usage. And in the RARA variants where the 1517 is negative, a RARA break apart probe is used to identify RARA associated the RARA variants. Apart from that, FISH can be used for MDS related karyotyping abnormalities like the trisomy 8, monosomy 7, and Delphi 2. Again, FISH can be used on the tissues and the myeloid sarcomas and can be especially applied in cases of 821 on inversion 16, which can present soon. PCR is used for confirming those abnormalities which are seen on the FISH. Upfront PCR is relatively preferred not to do, not to perform the upfront PCR unless it is very well standardized. Now, just a few words about the common genetic abnormalities. NPM mutation is detected by the technique which is the fragment length analysis or by Sanger sequencing, because the fragment length analysis, because it involves most often 4 base pairs insertion, or it may be 4 or 5 base pairs insertion at a particular focus, and which you can see, and best it can also be identified by the Sanger sequencing. SEPA mutation, as we said, biallelic mutations are the only ones which are associated with the good prognosis and is best identified by the Sanger sequencing. When we mean biallelic, in the same patient, there has to be 2 abnormalities, one at the which can be seen at the carboxy or the amino or even at the mid part of the SEPA gene. So if only when 2 abnormalities are present, then it is considered as a good prognosis. I would like to draw an attention for this particular thing. FLT3 ITD, it is an important mutation and can be seen in many groups of many cases of AML, and it does not is not necessarily associated as a separate category. It can be associated with normal karyotype or with certain cytogenetically abnormal or recurrent genetic abnormalities as well. Now, ITD means it's an insertion of 3 base pairs, or it's an internal tandem duplication, or it can be seen as multiples of 3 base pairs insertion in the FLT3 region. Now, allelic ratio is very, very important parameter, which is used for placing the group patients into a particular group. It is calculated by area under curve of mutant type divided by area under curve of wild type, which I'll be showing here. And a ratio of greater than or equal to 0.5 confers adverse prognosis as compared to low, which is defined by as less than 0.5. And the best technique to identify this is by the DNA fragment analysis. Now you can see here there's a wild type gene which is having a particular base pairs, and these are the mutant types. Here in this particular case, there are 2 types of the FLT3 ITDs in this particular case, and you have to add up these 2 and then divide the ratio of this divided by the area under curve of this wild type to get a ratio. In this case, it was greater than 0.5 and was definitely a poor prognosis. Apart from the ITD, TKD mutations can be seen, which is seen at the D835 codon. And in this case, it is negative. This particular case, it was negative. But this is also an important and is associated with poor prognosis. Apart from the FLT3, there are other mutations which have to be worked up, especially the KIT mutation. And when 821, which is supposed to be a good prognosis, when the KIT mutation is present, it is associated with poor prognosis. AML with RUNX1 mutation, TP53, ASXL1 are all poor prognostic parameters. And if there are mutations in the IDH1 and IDH2, currently we can there are certain targeted therapies which can be directed and should be identified as such. Apart from that, there are many more, but to name a few, DNMT3A, TET2, and EZH1 are some of the things which are currently evaluated. And DNMT3A has some therapeutic implication in terms of I mean, it's a sort of nuclear modulators. Now, keeping all this thing in mind, NGS is gaining importance due to multiple genetic abnormalities which can occur in AML. So if we should be able to identify all these abnormalities at one go so that it becomes economical. Otherwise, developing tests for each and assessing that becomes not financially viable. Also, it's more sensitive, relatively rapid, and can be used for the follow-up as well. Ambiguous lineage, nothing much to speak, but two genetic abnormalities which require attention are the BCR-ABL, the mixed phenotypic acute leukemias with BCR-ABL associated, and the MLL or the KMT2A associated. So the simple workup requires a karyotyping, which identifies many of the MPALs which are having a complex karyotype. FISH, which identifies the BCR-ABL1 for the and MLL or the KMT2A. Blastic plasmacytoid dendritic cell neoplasms, only the karyotyping is there and no robust data on the genetic abnormalities is available as such. So currently the comparative genomic hybridization is being done to identify certain genetic abnormalities, and possibly in future we may identify certain abnormalities. Just to wind up with a case, this is a 34-year-old female presenting with fever, breathlessness. On examination, there is pallor S2+, hepatomegaly, bone and bony tenderness was seen. Severe anemia, 38,000 of TLCs, platelets are 78,000, blasts were 50%. And these was a morphology of the blasts, which were myeloperoxidase, not so positive, or maybe occasional cells are positive. And flow-wise, it showed characteristic 34 expression along with the myeloid markers and the monoblastic markers, monocytic markers, 64, 14, 36 as well, and 33, 13, and partial HLA-DR. Negative for the B and the T cell markers with mild expression of CD56. FISH was performed, 821, inversion 16, PML, RARA, BCR-ABL all negative, but was positive for the MLL1. As you can see, the normal gene, normal expression, and the break apart being positive. FLT3, ITD, TKD, NPM1, SEPA not detected. So we know that this is an AML with a MLL associated genetic abnormality. The karyotyping was had come subsequently, which showed a 611 translocation. Now we know that MLL related all are adverse except the 911, which is the intermediate prognosis. So final diagnosis of AML or monoblastic leukemia with KMT2 rearranged showing the T611 was given, which belonged to the adverse risk group. Now the take-home message is karyotyping is mandatory for all acute leukemias. FISH analysis is dependent on what type of acute leukemia is being evaluated. For the BALLs, the standard evaluation must include the ETV6, RUNX1, BCR-ABL1, KMT2A, E2A, PBX1. And for the BCR-ABL-like ALL, the CRLF2, ABL1, ABL2, PDGFR-B, CSFR1R, JAK2, and EPOR FISH analysis should be done. For the TALL, although no specific abnormalities are there, if it is possible to do a TAL1 translocation. For the AML, RUNX1, RUNX1T1, that is 821, 1517, inversion 16, and the BCR-ABL should be definitely performed along with the KMT2A or the MLL1. Mixed phenotypic, FISH for the BCR-ABL1 and KMT2A should be performed. In BALL, if FISH is positive, PCR should be performed for ETV6, the next one, the specific abnormalities, and AF4, MLL1, E2A, PBX1. In the BCR-ABL1, like ALL, it depends whether the microarrays or the molecular sequencing analysis of JAK1, JAK2, and RAS mutations, IKZF deletion should be performed. For the TALLs, Notch1 mutation, and for the AML, if FISH is positive, do the translocations panels and identify the transcript so that that can be used for the follow-up, especially the next one, PML RARA, MYH8, CBFB. And apart from that, the FLT3, ITD, TKD, NPM1, SEPAR, RUNX1, and TP53 mutations should be performed by the sequencing or the fragment analysis. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Prashant, Dr. Aisha, other doctors, and my team, technical staff from the Department of Histopathology, Dr. Anurag, the head of Cytogenetics Department, Dr. Suresh Prabhu, and technical staff of Molecular Diagnostics, technical staff of Histopathology and Path Management. And I would like to thank HAP and Dr. Roshi ma'am, the coordinator for this session, to give me this opportunity to be on this platform. And a very thank you for all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Manu. I think we'll go ahead with Dr. Vanajakshi. Dr. Vanajakshi is Senior Consultant Hematopathologist. Ma'am, can you share your screen? Dr. Vanajakshi, ma'am, you have to unmute yourself also.
Afternoon. Welcome to HAP Hemat Meet. Today I'm going to talk about interpretation of WBC scatter plots in hematological malignancies. So all of us know CBC or full blood count is most commonly ordered performed screening test in standalone or hospital attached hematology laboratory because of its clinical usefulness. New generation 5 to 7 part hematology analyzers generates more than 50 parameters nowadays, which includes both numerical as well as graphical data with or without flags, with good precision accuracy on 200 microliters of anticoagulated whole blood samples in less than 60 seconds. The graphical displays includes two types, histograms and scatter plots. Histogram represents relative number of RBCs, WBCs, platelets plotted against the cell size. Whereas the various dot plots includes WBC diff, WBC baso, immature myeloid information channel, NRPCs, reticulocytes, and platelet optical channel scatter plots. Coming to the scatter plots are derived either from bivariate or multivariate analysis, and fixed or variable thresholds will be used to separate these clusters from each other and matched with a normal template white cell clusters and then enumerated. In hematological malignancies, the graphical patterns observed on fluoroflow cytometry based cell counters give a clue to suspect or establish a preliminary diagnosis before slide review. The in acute and chronic leukemias can be suspected or identified based on following scatter plots. One is the WBC differential scattergrams. This is first with the special reagent, RBCs are lysed or rendered transparent, and WBCs are stained with the fluorescent dye, and then based upon the fluorescence versus side scatter, depending upon the fluorescence and its side scatter characteristics, the normal 4 WBC population like the lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils and neutrophils are identified. Whereas in WBC Bezos scattergram, initially the diluted sample is treated with a specific reagent which degranulates all WBCs except basophils. The basophils are gated against forward scatter versus side scatter, and then they are enumerated. Coming to the immature myeloid information scattergram channel. In this, the immature myeloid cells, either in the form of left-shifted cells or blasts, are identified because of their low frequency versus direct current signals. Coming to the basic principles of these hematological analyzers, most of these analyzers will utilize either 2 or 3 of these principles to do the differential counts. The various the principles includes electrical impedance, optical light scatter and absorbance, fluorescence flow cytometry, VCS technology that includes volume conductivity scatter plots, and then radio frequency and direct current signals, cytochemistry, and MAPS, that is multiple angle polarized scatter separation. And the recent some of the hematology analyzers, they are utilizing nowadays monoclonal antibody tagging, so that we can able to do the complete myelogram even on bone marrow aspiration samples. They can individually identify each and every immature myeloid series. Coming this illustration to show you the fluorescent flow cytometry, wherein the cells in a diluted sample flow through the flow cell as a single file, pass the laser beam. The reflected forward angle indicates the cell size, and the side scatter or 90-degree angle scattered light indicates the complexity of the cell. This illustration I want to show, based on fluoroflow cytometry, the 4 normal WBCs are identified based upon their fluorescence versus side scatter. As you know, lymphocytes will have a low fluorescence and low side scatter, and the eosinophils will have a high side scatter and low fluorescence. This is another a picture showing abnormal diff scattergram. Whenever lymphoblasts are there, the lymphoblast will start from the lymphocyte region upwards with a high lateral fluorescence but low side scatter, whereas monoblasts will start from monocytic region, extend upwards with the intermediate degree fluorescence or high lateral fluorescence and intermediate side scatter, whereas myeloblasts will start from neutrophil region and extends upwards with a high fluorescence and high side scatter. This is the WBC, the picture right upper side, WBC Bezos scattergram. In this, the diluted blood sample treated with a special reagent which degranulates all the WBCs except the basophils, and the basophils then are identified and enumerated based on the forward scatter and side scatter. Coming to the IMI channel, here the immature cells like the left shifted cells and the blasts were identified based on radio frequency and direct current. These cells will have a low radio frequency. This is again the WBC Bezos scattergram, the principle. And coming to the various hematological analyzers available in the market, the Beckman-Coulters, it utilizes the principle of volume, conductivity, and scatter to classify the WBC series. And coming to the Abbott company, which uses the MAPS technology, wherein the additional 2 light scatter grams, it will take it into consideration. The narrow angle light scatters, that is 0 to 10 degree light scatter, will utilize this to note the internal complexity, whereas the 90 degrees lateral scatter with depolarization are used to identify eosinophils. Coming to the Horibas Pentra or Umezen 5 to 7 part different analyzers, here after staining the cells with the specific dyes, the cells are classified into normal 4 populations based on its absorbance and electrical resistance. With extended double diff matrix, it can able to identify immature granulocytes extending from the neutrophilic region and immature monocytes extending from the monocytes, and immature lymphocytes extending from the lymphocytic region. So coming to the case series. Case 1 is a male 54-year-old known case of ALL presented with moderate thrombocytopenia and mucosal bleeds. Then this is the bone marrow we ran into the mission that showed very high count WBC indicating a hypercellular marrow, and the diff scattergram showed abnormal dot plot that extending from the lymphocyte region upwards with a high site fluorescence. Based on this, we can suspect maybe the patient has relapsed. That was confirmed on the bone marrow aspiration showing sheets of pus. Coming to the second case, this is a young 21-year-old male patient entered into our emergency department with a high-grade fever and CNS symptoms, and the CT showed IC bleed, and the CBC, the numerical data showed very severe anemia of 5.6 grams hemoglobin and severe thrombocytopenia of 24,000, WBCs, mild leukocytosis, but diff scatter plot is very characteristic. So it is showing a teardrop shaped cell cluster with a high fluorescent scatter, side fluorescence as well as side scatter originating from the neutrophilic region as well as the monocytic region extending upwards, very characteristic of promyelocytic leukemia. That later it was confirmed on the peripheral smear that edge showing sheets of abnormal promyelocytes and blasts, and it was confirmed on fish showing PML-RARA mutation. Coming to the third case, this patient, again male patient, 45-year-old, presented with fever and hepatosplenomegaly, and blood screening showed pancytopenia and presence of monocytoid cells. Then we got a bone marrow that we ran into our mission. Then that showed very high WBC count, suggesting maybe hypercellular marrow. And then in the diff scatter plot, WBC diff scatter plot, there is an abnormal plot extending from the monocytes straight upwards with a high side fluorescence. And apart from that, normal granulopathic series with the left shift, and there is prominence of eosinophilic cluster. Then this was confirmed suggesting a acute monocytic leukemia, and which was confirmed on the bone marrow aspirate as well as the fish showing inversion 16, and the next generation sequencing showed CBF beta MYH abnormality with secondary cooperative mutation, both K and NRAS mutation. Coming to the fourth case, this is a 60-year-old male presented with a chronic fatigue, and his blood screening revealed a very high WBC count of almost 3 lakhs, 2.9 lakhs, and moderate anemia and marked thrombocytosis. Apart from that, his basophil count is 3.4%, absolute count is very high. From the numerical data itself we can suspect. In this case, the WBC diff scatter plot showed there is a hyper myelopoiesis with marked left shifted population, and there is a slight increase in blast population represented by the abnormal blast population extending from the lymphocytes, monocytes upwards with a increased site fluorescence and a mild eosinophilia. This WBC basal scatter plot clearly shows clear basophilic cell cluster. So based on the numerical data, we can suspect an histogram WBC scatter plot anyway, along with the WBC basochannel gram, we can able to identify clearly. Later it was confirmed on fish, it was BCR-ABL positive. Coming to the next case, this is a male around 60s, came for a routine blood checkup because of the chronic fatigue. His WBC count again is very high, almost more than 3 lakhs, and he has hypochromic microcytic type of anemia, and his platelet counts were normal. Whereas the scattergram showed there is abnormal population extending from the lymphocytic region slightly upwards with increased lateral fluorescence, but a neutrophilic series and eosinophilic series are normal. These debris may be the other smudge cells, and then later on the peripheral smear, it showed prominent absolute lymphocytosis, small lymphocytosis, and many smudge cells, and it was confirmed. And we thought it is CLL. It was confirmed even on the flow. It was a classical CLL. Coming to the sixth case, this is again very interesting case. Male 47-year-old presented with fatigue, hepatosplenomegaly. His clinical chemistry revealed increased LDH as well as the uric acid and a normal calcium. Then his blood screens showed same 21,000 something the WBC count and severe anemia and thrombocytopenia. And the peripheral blood film showed sheets of plasma cells, abnormal small plasma cells, prominent nucleoli and perinuclear half. And then the bone marrow, we got it, we ran into our mission. That showed an abnormal high fluorescence cells, indicating the presence of the abnormal plasma cells might be. That later confirmed on the aspirate showing multinucleated abnormal plasmacytoblasts. And then which was confirmed on the flow showing, we reported it as plasma cell leukemia. And on flow, it was abnormal plasma cells showed lambda light chain restriction, 117 CD117 positive, but 56 antigen expression was negative. And the molecular genetics showed deletion 13, apart from that TP53 positive. So the prognosis is intermediate prognostic prognosis. But this is another interesting case. And my last case. To conclude, it is possible to get a clue to make a preliminary diagnosis of hematological malignancies on clinical samples quickly based on numerical data and WBC diff graphical patterns, and if IMI channel graphical patterns if it is available, with the latest hematology analyzer before peripheral smear review, especially in cases with the normal counts and low counts. Thank you for your patience listening, and thanks for the HAP Hemat organizers giving me this opportunity to deliver this talk on this virtual platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanajakshi ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll share my screen now. Good afternoon. I'll be speaking on myeloid sarcomas. When do we suspect them and how to diagnose? I'll just give you a few cases to show why I got interested in this topic of myeloid sarcomas. This is way back around 20 years ago. We had a female of 35 years of age who presented with a breast mass. And we could, on the histopathology, see the breast ducts and acini. And there was an infiltrate of fairly monomorphic round cells, vesicular nuclei, admixed with a few eosinophilic precursors. So just by morphology, we called it a leukemic infiltrate. However, the peripheral blood sample as well as the marrow showed no blast. It was absolute showed differential. But during this period, 3 bone marrow studies were done, which were all normal. 1.5 years later, she had blasts in the periphery, and marrow done at that time showed blasts. And then she was put on chemotherapy. However, she succumbed from the illness within a few days. So this is the time where I got interested in this topic and read a lot about it. And we had a publication at that time regarding the myeloid sarcomas, which at that time was called extramedullary myeloid cell tumor. The second case which I'll be showing is a 16-year-old female who presented with a parapharyngeal mass. The biopsy showed sheets of large cells with vesicular nuclei, moderate cytoplasm. LC was intensely positive. However, CD3 and CD20 were negative. At that point of time, no further markers was done. And because LCA was positive, it was reported as an NHL. The patient was sent to us for a bone marrow, which showed blasts, both myeloid blasts as well as monocytic blasts. And then it was reported as AML with monocytic differentiation. So it was at that time that we realized that this, what was reported was NHL, was not an NHL. This is a known case of CML chronic phase, which came now presented with lymphadenopathy. And what it showed was an enlarged lymph node with a phased architecture and infiltration of the surrounding fibroadipose tissue. And here we see diffuse infiltration by large cells with a vesicular nuclei, moderate cytoplasm. LCA was intensely positive in these cells. MPO was in some cells positive. CD68 was very strongly positive. CD34 was also positive in few of those cells. And both CD3 and CD20 were negative. So by now we had a lot of awareness of this, and this was signed out as a myeloid sarcoma. So now, what myeloid sarcoma? As per the WHO definition, it is a tumor mass consisting of myeloid blasts with or without maturation in any site of the body other than the bone marrow. The various synonyms which have been used, which include granulocytic sarcoma, chloroma, because of the green color that is seen on the fresh specimen because of the activity of the enzyme. It's also been termed extramedullary myeloid cell tumor. Now the sites, any site in the body can be involved: lymph nodes, skin, subcutaneous tissue, breast, bones, anything else. The term leukemia cutis is a cutaneous manifestation of any type of leukemic infiltrate in the skin. However, when the skin is infiltrated with cells of myeloid origin, which form a mass, then it can be termed as myeloid sarcoma. Meningeal leukemia, it's not synonymous. Only when the infiltrate forms a mass can the term myeloid sarcoma be used. Now, there are different clinical scenarios in which one sees a myeloid sarcoma. The masses may occur simultaneously with AMLs, myeloproliferative neoplasms, or MDS. And if they occur simultaneously, no problem. The same chemotherapy or whatever is being used for the original disease will continue. It can occur as a relapse in treated AMLs or when myeloproliferative neoplasms are transforming into blast crisis, and is a criteria for CML blast crisis. But when they occur, they can occur prior to the diagnosis of AML, and they may precede by months or years when the AML then starts, like in our first case. However, sometimes they can be de novo or isolated myeloid sarcomas, which even on follow-up do not develop a hematological malignancy. They can occur secondary to chemotherapy or any other malignancy. This is a case with a skin myeloid sarcoma, the epidermis which is normal and infiltrate in the dermis, and this was both LCA and myeloperoxidase positive. Now, what is the pathology? On gross, when you do get a gross specimen, they are firm fish flesh in appearance. They can be white or brown or green. The histopathology in the older WHOs, WHO 2001, described three types as blastic, immature, and well differentiated. However, as there is no significance prognostically about this, the later WHOs do not use this classification. Now, what one sees are myeloblasts with or without maturing myeloid precursors. They may be myelomonocytic cells or pure monoblastic cells. Predominantly erythroid and megakaryoblast myeloid sarcomas are rare, and if they do occur, they're usually in the background of MPNs which have gone into transformation. Now, histologically, one sees nests, sheets, or they can have an India file pattern, can be infiltrative. Rarely, they show a starry sky appearance. And what is common are eosinophilic myelocytes, which, as seen here, they're eosinophilic precursors which have bright orange granules in their cytoplasm. On immunohistochemistry, there are a wide range of IHC markers. LCA is generally positive, but not always. it is positive in 84% of the cases. Myeloperoxidase may be positive 83 to 100% of cases. And the markers of myeloid differentiation would include lysozyme, CD68, CD43, 33, 34, CD117, and myeloperoxidase. For monocytic differentiation, they will be positive for 68. There are two clones of CD68. CD68KP1 positive in both myeloid and monocytic cells, whereas CD68 PGM1 is positive in monocytic cells. So in myelomonocytic differentiation, you could get CD68 positivity and MPO positivity. Monoblastic myeloid sarcomas will be mainly positive for CD68, CD163, and they would lack myeloperoxidase and CD34 positivity. Erythroid precursors would stain with glycophorin A and C, HB, and CD71. CD43 is actually a T cell marker, but it is positive in 97% of myeloid sarcomas. The megakaryoblast myelosarcomas would be positive for CD61, 31, or von Willebrand's factor 8. CD56 is expressed in 20% cases, CD99 is positive in 50%, and TDT is positive in 37% cases. There may be some foci of plasmacytoid dendritic cell differentiation, which will be positive for CD123 and 303 and CD56 negative. Now, we can't possibly do all markers when you suspect myeloid sarcoma. So what are the recommendations for when one just suspects a usual common myeloid sarcoma? MPO, myeloperoxidase, CD68, if lysozyme is available, and CD34. Now, the genetic profile of myeloid sarcomas, by FISH and conventional cytogenetics, you may get some abnormality in 50 to 60% of the cases. Monosomy 7, trisomy 8, inversion 16, all what Dr. Manu has just talked about. Translocation 821 has been reported more frequently in pediatric patients with myeloid sarcomas, especially orbital myeloid sarcomas. NPN1 mutations are seen in some cases, and they are generally associated with monocytic or monocytic morphology. FLT3 ITD mutations may be seen in some cases. Now, myeloid sarcomas are usually a diagnosis of exclusion. We don't really suspect them at first. So the most common differential diagnoses include, there are neoplastic as well as reactive. The neoplastic include NHL, Hodgkin's lymphoma and ALCL, other round cell tumors, poorly differentiated carcinomas or melanoma, histiocytic lesions like Langerhans cell histiocytosis, and plasmacytoid dendritic cell neoplasm. The reactive causes, reactive differential diagnosis would include extramedullary hemopoiesis as well as infective causes or abscesses. Now, DLBCL is the most common misdiagnosis, as did happen in some of our early cases. Now, how does one differentiate? The nuclear membrane is fairly thick in a DLBCL, whereas it is thin in myeloid sarcoma. Nucleoli are generally prominent and basophilic here, pinpoint in myeloid sarcomas. The immunohistochemical profile would be the diagnostic thing. The DLBCLs would be positive for pan-B cell markers and negative for myeloid markers. We expect the myeloid sarcomas to be positive for some myeloid marker. However, there are some exceptions. Some myeloid sarcomas can express aberrant B antigens. Other NHLs, some NHLs may have a starry sky pattern and apoptosis, which are seen in Burkitt lymphoma or the lymphoblastic lymphomas. Sometimes myeloid sarcoma may have this starry sky appearance. Now, as you know, Burkitt lymphomas are positive for the pan-B cell markers, CD10 and BCL6, and they would be negative for myeloid markers. Lymphoblastic lymphomas, you have the T lymphoblastic and the B lymphoblastic. The T lymphoblastic lymphomas are positive for T cell markers. 34, 43 are positive. TDT may be variably expressed in myeloid sarcomas. The B lymphoblastic lymphomas are positive for B cell markers, CD10 and TDT. But you have to remember that sometimes these express CD13 and CD33, which are myeloid markers, and rarely MPO. But coming to Hodgkin lymphoma and ALCL, myeloid sarcomas with maturing myeloid precursors, lots of eosinophil precursors may resemble Hodgkin lymphoma and ALCL. The Hodgkin's lymphoma has usually classic binucleate or bilobed Reed-Sternberg cells, or there may be atypical mononuclear cells. Generally in Hodgkin's lymphoma, we have CD30 positivity, both membranous and Golgi area, as shown in this figure. CD15 would be positive, and PAX5 shows nuclear positivity in the RS cells. ALCL, you can have myeloid sarcoma with a lot of monocytic differentiation, which have large cells with folded nuclear contours, and these can resemble the hallmark cells. And these would be positive for CD30, but ALK may be positive or negative, depending on which ALCL it is. So the myeloid sarcomas, one has to remember, rarely can be CD30 positive, but they lack the uniform and membranous and Golgi area positivity that is seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma or ALCL. Coming to all the other round tumors in the pediatric population, Ewing net or neuroblastoma or RMS can all have round cells. However, these would be positive for their respective IHC profile for whatever that round cell tumor is, and they would lack the myeloid antigens. However, the problems faced would be as follows. CD99, which is generally positive in the Ewing sarcoma, may be positive in some cases of myeloid sarcoma. The next differential would be poorly differentiated carcinoma metastasis or melanomas. Myeloid sarcoma with monocytic differentiation can have large cells with an infiltrative pattern. The poorly differentiated carcinomas are positive for cytokeratin, epithelial markers, and negative for myeloid markers. Melanoma, one sees discohesive cells with large, very prominent nucleoli, and they are positive for S100, HMB45, but sometimes can be positive for CD68. Histiocytic lesions, especially Langerhans cell histiocytosis in children, they can, Langerhans cell histiocytosis and myeloid sarcomas with differentiation could mimic each other. The Langerhans cells, we expect large oval cells which have their longitudinal groove admixed with eosinophils and histiocytes. On immunohistochemistry, these cells are positive, so S100, CD1A, and they are negative for myeloid markers. CD68 could be positive in some cells. The next entity, which is very rare, is blastic plasmacytoid dendritic cell neoplasm. It affects the skin, bone marrow, peripheral blood, and lymph nodes, and can resemble cutaneous myeloid sarcomas. They consist of medium-sized monotonous blast-like cells. On immunohistochemistry, positive for CD4, CD56, CD123, CD303, TCL1, and then negative for MPO. There may be some CD68 positivity, which shows small cytoplasmic dots. This is a case which showed a skin lesion, which is like this, and the epidermis normal, and this lesion within the dermis, which is composed of monomorphic round cells. Now, we finished the neoplastic conditions. We come to extramedullary hematopoiesis. What is extramedullary hematopoiesis? It is not synonymous with myeloid sarcoma. It is defined as forming of poietic cells in any organ outside the marrow. Now, this can be physiological, and which is what we see in embryonic development. You can see extramedullary hematopoiesis, or it can be pathological. For example, there are hematological conditions like ITPs, congenital hemolytic anemias, as well as neoplastic conditions like AMLs, MPNs, MDSs, where we have non-effacing proliferation of hemopoietic precursors, or these may occur following growth factor therapy. Now, if you see here, this is a section of a spleen in a case of ITP, and it showed numerous megakaryocytes, and it was termed as extramedullary hematopoiesis. Due to stromal abnormalities like osteopetrosis, renal osteodystrophy, and fibrosis of the marrow following infections or storage disorders, one may see extramedullary hematopoiesis. It is also seen in certain tumors like hematoblastoma, where we get some extramedullary hematopoietic elements. The sites of extramedullary hematopoiesis are spleen, liver, lymph nodes, but can be seen in other tissues like lung and elsewhere. How does one differentiate? In extramedullary hematopoiesis, it is usually trilineage, where there's in myeloid sarcomas, it is more often myeloid or monocytoid. The blasts are usually lacking in extramedullary hematopoiesis, whereas they are present in myeloid sarcomas. Now, this is a case of a CML which developed a sarcoma. The peripheral blood bone marrow CML chronic phase, whereas this patient developed lymphadenopathy, and on examination, the lymph node showed both blasts as well as a large number of megakaryocytes, and this was termed as a myeloid sarcoma. Now, regarding infective processes or an abscess, occasionally myeloid sarcomas can resemble an abscess or even a hematoma, and morphology would be diagnostic. We would have more mature cells seen in an abscess with no blast. So how does one manage myeloid sarcoma? Once the diagnosis of myeloid sarcoma is confirmed, systemic chemotherapy like what is given for AML has to be given. Some cases may require radiotherapy when they are present in certain sites like paraspinal masses. So these are given radiotherapy followed by chemotherapy. And if the mass is large and forming pressure on other organs, surgery if the mass is large, followed by chemotherapy. So what is the take-home message? Myeloid sarcomas are usually a diagnosis of exclusion. They're not a very common entity, and awareness of the entity and its management is important. A detailed clinical history, past history, examination, the peripheral blood findings at that time, the bone marrow findings, and as the morphology may be varied, IHC is a must. If possible, cytogenetic and molecular studies. And once a diagnosis is confirmed, systemic chemotherapy is essential. However, still, isolated or de novo myeloid sarcomas are a diagnostic challenge. Thank you. So we have today finished today's things. Do we have any questions? Dr. Manu, some questions for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Somebody who's anonymous has said, can cytogenetics be sent on peripheral blood sample if blast count is high? If marrow is dry tap or diluted, how to send cytogenetic sample?
Right. I think it's a very good question from the practical perspective. First thing I would like to say, one thing one has to remember, karyotyping, if performed on the bone marrow aspirate, is the best karyotyping. The reason is the blasts which are derived from the bone marrow, they are in a milieu which is conducive for the growth of the blasts. So the same thing happens externally, ex vivo, those can be cultured better. And the study and the metaphases are better quality. However, in cases where the bone marrow tap, it's a dry tap and it's not available, you can, the peripheral blood can be used for a culture in kind of desperate situation where you have no other alternative. Second thing is, when you are doing a trifine biopsy or dry tap is there, culturing a bone marrow biopsy is also a good option. But immediately what you have to do is take the bone marrow biopsy and put in the RPMI media, and hence it can be, the cells can be scraped from the bone marrow biopsy and can be used for the culture. That's another alternate media, way of procuring good kind of blasts. And we do that regularly in our setup. Whenever we don't get an aspirate and karyotyping is critical, we do take the bone marrow biopsy, put it in the RPMI media, and scrape the cells and use it for the culture.
Okay. There's another question from again an anonymous attendee. This is for me. In a diagnosed case of myeloid sarcoma of the orbit, if the bone marrow shows only 10% blasts, how to report such cases and their effect on treatment? Yeah, like I tried to say earlier, the marrow may still be, it is almost like an MDS-EB if it has 10% blast. But if you can do immunohistochemistry on that orbital mass and be convinced that it is of myeloid origin, it is reported as such, and as per current guidelines, they are treated with systemic chemotherapy. Okay, I think I've answered the question. Anybody else? I can see only 2 questions at the moment, so any other of the panelists want to add anything? Or Dr. Sudha, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think if we are done with the questions, then a small announcement.
Yeah, I could see only 2 questions, so I
Can I just have a comment on the second part, which you were just saying?
Go ahead.
So the question was myeloid sarcoma. If yes, the important thing is, as you had already described, that there are 3 types of myeloid sarcoma. The differentiating, that also they have to keep in mind. And if it is blastic, it is as equivalent as AML only. So it has to be treated like an AML. And importantly, the cytogenetic abnormalities have to be tested. It should not be ignored. You can do a PCR or a FISH basis on the tissue type, so that even if they are less than 20% blasts, even in the myeloid sarcoma, and if it is positive for 821 or inversion 16, it has to be treated as an AML.
Thank you. Any more comments?
Dr. Vanajakshi, would you like to say something?
So we should not ignore the graphical displays. Normally we will concentrate as soon as the slide comes for review, we'll concentrate on the numerical data. And straight away we'll put a oil and we'll see under the microscope. Or we'll scan once and we will see the microscope. But before going to the microscopy, you will get so much of information to diagnose not only the malignant hematological disorders, even benign disorders. You can get a clue. Based on that, you can ask ancillary tests step by step, rather than asking whole gamut of ancillary tests. Not required. Step by step you can go. So not only in malignant disorders, hematological disorders, even so many benign disorders you can able to detect by concentrating on the graphical display. Without any effort, it will come on your table with those printouts. And otherwise, if you have some problem, you can go to the next to the analyzer and you see yourself, because the printouts are black and white. Sometimes malaria detection, for example, some certain hints we can able to get. And dengue season, for example, the reactive lymphocytes, especially the lymphoid population, whether they are reactive, they are leukemias. Sometimes you will have a doubt. Based on those scatter plots, you can just think whether you can inform to the clinicians also it is not leukemia. Maybe infectious mononucleosis. Those things, you will get high fluorescent cells apart from the normal populations. In leukemias, you will get only 2 scatter abnormal and few normal cells, either a neutrophilic series or there won't be any eosinophils. Only 2 clusters you will see. And the separation of cluster won't be there. You can suspect based on the graphical display itself. You can have a quick diagnosis. You can discuss with the clinicians. If you want any further details, you can ask them. Anything else?
I have a question for Dr. Vanajakshi.
Yes.
Ma'am, some of the cases you showed, the aspirates we had fed in the instrument.
Yes.
Do you do that often?
This actually for the MINRE, their conference, I thought let me do something new rather than just even bone marrows also. By the time the stained film comes to us, it will take almost 1 hour. So preliminary, whether it is abnormal or normal, we can able to differentiate based on the scatter plots. Then I thought definitely it will be useful. Let us start using that technology. Why we should not? In that way, I started doing that. Sometimes the leukopenia cases and normal counts, those cases also definitely it will be helpful to get a hint in what way we have to go further to work up further. So,
Roshni,
Definitely it will be useful.
I think.
Gayatri ma'am, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the underlying message in what Dr. Vanajakshi is saying is that one should take advantage of that visual information that is so easily, readily available on the screen. One should get into the habit of walking to the instruments, looking at the monitor, get familiarized. Then it will not be long before we can start identifying problems before the next step, that is the smear making and the staining. And in large volume output laboratories, especially hospital based laboratories, where one expects abnormalities, as compared to standalone laboratories which are catering to general population, the institutional ones, I think the displays will be very critical. And you can, maybe you don't want to stain all the smears in a day because the volumes will be very high. And in that case, the visual display on the monitor can help you sift and pick up the ones that must be screened under the microscope. I think it's an extremely vital advantage that we should start learning, becoming proficient at. We should sit at the screen, maybe assign that as a thesis topic to a PG, make them sit in the front of the screen, let them just look at 10,000 sample histograms, let them look at that and let them just sift out normal from abnormal. And then the next phase, one can become more proficient. I think there is a wealth of information that we are not tapping, and we should do that. That is the message I very strongly get from what Vanajakshi is saying, and I think all of us also would have seen similar. I think we're not capitalizing on that. The instrument has become smarter than us. We need to catch up. Like our phones, the phones are smarter than us. So we need to catch up with what the instruments are providing. And as far as the molecular workup is concerned, I think it is the norm of today's practice. If we do not provide this additional information in a case of acute leukemia, we are failing the individual patient. Forget about what we are gaining as or failing as professionals. I think we are failing because we are denying the right therapy to every patient. I think we should, if we do not have the capacity to do it in our establishment, we should approach sources that will accept these because they have the infrastructure and the volumes. So we should utilize them. We should extend that. We should not underplay the importance of all these in today's practice of hemato-oncology. Treatment is not the only goal of hemato-oncology. Cure is the goal. Cure is what the hematologist is aiming at, as opposed to what it was 20 years back. So we need to step up and we need to make that mandatory in the workup of, we are currently now, if you see from these talks, we are being led by the sophistication in instrumentation, sophistication in therapy. We should start becoming forerunners. And before we do that, we need to catch up. That is my, I think that was very clear in all the three presentations today.
Final word from Sudha.
I think you should be giving the final word. Just wanted to thank all the speakers for the excellent talks. Just to remind all the delegates that tomorrow we have Dr. Faik Ahmed speaking on immunohistochemistry complementary tool in bone marrow pathology, Dr. Shantveer speaking on PNH testing by flow cytometry, and Dr. Gayatri speaking on signposts on the diagnosis of hemolytic anemia. We would be sending the links for tomorrow's registration today after the session to all the delegates. Please log in through that. Tomorrow, I'm sure you would enjoy as much as you have done today. And I hand it over to Roshni. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for the session today, all the speakers today, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you.
Shall we sign out?
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.